Hi, I'm Alex. I run Crafty Clay Babes, and I'm so excited you're here and considering 3D printing. We're going to run through this guide pretty quickly, but never fear, I have sent a PDF to your email with the link back to this video just in case you want to reference it again. So keep an eye out for that after you've watched this video, and I can't wait to get started with you. I love 3D printing. I started out as a polymer clay earring artist and sold earrings for about a year and a half, somewhere in there. And about 6 months into my journey, I started 3D printing. So I grabbed an Ender 3D printer, which compared to the printers now was kind of garbage. But I made the leap into 3D printing. It was quite frustrating. It took me about 6 to 8 months before I was making clay cutters in a way that was consistent and that I understood what I was doing for the most part. I probably didn't really fully understand 3D printing until a year into my journey. So I moved into selling clay cutters about 6 months after I started 3D printing and sold some cutters that were not so great. But about 2 years into my clay cutter tool selling journey, I hurt my shoulder and had to stop selling physical products because I couldn't package, ship, or create the kind of video content that I needed to be creating. And I honestly love 3D printing, super obsessed with it, and I love the polymer clay community. I wanted to find a way to serve them, so I started making courses on how to create your own tools yourself to save you time, money, and to really boost your creativity. So that's a lot about me, but I wanted you to know where I was coming from and why I feel like I have the expertise needed to teach you about 3D printing. So first of all, what is 3D printing? I assume you already, if you're curious about it, have already heard about it some, know about it some, but just in case, 3D printing is turning a digital design into a real physical object. Instead of printing on paper, it's printing layers of plastic. And here I have added a picture of a cat cutter that I printed with really thick layers to kind of show you what that looks like and what you're seeing. So why I think you should consider printing your own clay cutters. The reason I jumped into 3D printing is because I wanted cutter designs that weren't out there. I also bought clay cutters that were quite pricey, understandably. I used to sell them, but they were quite pricey and they weren't exactly what I wanted, and I waited weeks to get them between the cart decision fatigue. You add a bunch to your cart and then you delete the ones that you're like, oh, I shouldn't spend money on that. Then the actual handling and packaging and shipping. By the time it got to me, the vision I had for it was gone. So that was the most frustrating part to me. But the way I convinced my husband I should get a 3D printer is the money savings. So this cutter right here, which is very cute by the way, toot my own horn, but it only cost me 40 cents to print. That's with filament and electricity considered. It does not take as much electricity as you might think. I think I only saw a bump of like $10 on my electricity bill with 5 A1 minis. But yeah, a very nice high quality cutter like this being only 40 cents versus, I used to sell them for probably $10 for this one specifically because of the overhead and the cost of the printers and listing and the time advertising. You can cut all of that out and just print them yourself. And if you want to design your own cutters and get into designing your own cutters, that's going to save you and possibly even make you money in the long run as well, because you can offer your customers custom cutters and custom shapes and make things on a whim. So I definitely recommend printing your own clay cutters. So what do you need to start printing? You need a 3D printer, you need filament, you need a slicing software, and of course you need the file, the actual clay cutter file to print the cutter that you want. So the printer I recommend and the standard I use for teaching 3D printing is Bambu's A1 Mini. I have had 3 different printers. I started with the Ender, and then I moved to a Prusa Mini, and then I used a Bambu A1 Mini, and I ran off of 5 of those for the last bit of my clay cutter selling journey. I now also have an A1 back here, that's what you see. So I've had 4 different kinds of printers, 2 of them being Bambu's. I highly recommend the Bambu A1 Mini. It is small, it's not going to take up a whole bunch of room in your craft room, and it is super beginner friendly, super beginner friendly. You can set up in less than an hour. By the time I got to my 5th printer, I had it set up in less than 30 minutes. It's a great size for cutters and other tools. I mean, like I said, I ran my business on 5 of them. So even though you could get a bigger one like this one, you really don't need to, and honestly, I prefer the A1 Mini for cutters anyways. Also, another perk, if you don't have a computer and that's one of the things that's keeping you from doing it, you can print cutters from your phone using Bamboo's model site. So that's a nice, fun little perk. Okay, so filament. My recommended filament for beginners is Bamboo's Basic PLA. It works really well for what comes with the printer, which is a 0.4 nozzle. It has lots of colors. I love the reusable spools. You can buy it with your printer, and if you get around to designing your own cutters and uploading them to their model site, you can also get points and get filament for free. So I really like it for the 0.4 nozzle. I do not recommend it for a 0.2 nozzle. My recommended slicing software is of course going to be Bamboo Studio's slicing software. It's great for beginners. It's what I use to teach. If you print through their model site, the slicing settings are already built into it. So you could be printing cutters in no time and not have to fuss with any of the technical jargon to be printing cutters. Where can you grab clay cutter STL files? So the digital files to print the cutters, you can get them from MakerWorld, which is Bamboo's free model site, which I've mentioned a couple of times now, Etsy, Cults 3D, Thingiverse, and possibly your favorite clay cutter sellers sites. A lot of clay cutter sellers are moving towards offering STL files with the boom of polymer clay artists starting to 3D print cutters themselves. Some extras that you might want to have on hand are isopropyl alcohol. You'll want a high percentage, a 0.2 nozzle if you want more detailed or smaller cutters, a smooth plate if you don't want the textured plate, which is this thing right here, and then the AMS light. The AMS light is a color changing system that switches filament out. That might be something you want to consider. And then some 3D printing terms that you'll come across. So plate embed or print bed and build plate, they're used kind of interchangeably. And it is the removable metal that you will find on your printer. This is what your designs will print on, and then you can flex it because it's bendy and they'll pop off. But it heats up well, it's magnetic, and it's just an awesome, awesome thing. I started out with glass printer beds, and those were a pain. I would sit there and scrape and scrape and scrape. It would take forever to get cutters off, and they would end up so ugly on the back. So these are really nice, and that's usually what's being referred to when you hear plate embed or print bed and build plate. Alright, so an STL or STL file is just the digital 3D file that you use to print the cutters, or any object. And then the G-code is the file that your printer reads. So the slicer software is the program that turns that STL file into G-code, because G-code is all that your printer can read. You can't just plug an STL into a printer. And then filament is usually a spool of plastic material. There are other kinds of materials though, but as far as clay cutters and clay tools, all you'll need is PLA. Not this one because it's matte, but a basic PLA, which is like glossy. It's just like a string of plastic that gets melted through the hot nozzle that the printer has. PLA happens to be the most popular and beginner friendly. It's very easy to use, and all I recommend for clay cutters and tools. Next is stringing. This is something that you will most definitely come across at some point in your 3D printing journey, and it's just the very thin hair-like strands that you'll find kind of somewhere in your print, and it's just where the printer isn't pulling the filament out like back through the nozzle while it's moving across your print fast enough, and so little itty bits of filament like melt and ooze and cause that kind of stringing across your print. And then layer height is kind of, the cutter I showed at the beginning, the layer height is the thickness of those layers. So the thinner the layers or smaller the height, the smoother your print will look. It'll look more like an object instead of those melted layers of filament. And then the first layer is a term that you'll hear a lot because it is the most important layer of your print. If the first layer doesn't lay correctly, it's not going to print correctly. You really need that first layer to adhere to the bed well and to print well, not have any gaps or anything like that. Okay, so you've got the printer, now what do? You're going to unbox your printer and follow the instructions included in the box and remove all of the extra packaging. You will plug in and turn on the printer, and if you got a bamboo printer, you would follow the instructions on the printer screen and download the Bamboo Handy app. You can go through all the calibration steps mentioned on the screen, and once it's done and ready to print, you're going to clean the plate with a cloth and isopropyl alcohol. And kind of a shameless plug, but if you look for the Pudgy Art Bandit, it is my clay cutter business name. So what I used to sell clay cutters under was the Pudgy Art Bandit, and you're going to find your new favorite cutter, click it, and then click print. Once you give it time to print and it's cooled down, you can pop your cutter off the plate like so. You just flex it and it will come off and you will have printed your first clay cutter. So getting started with 3D printing really isn't that hard, and your first prints are probably going to be fabulous. Whether you continue learning with me or you go out on your own, those first prints are going to be fabulous. Bamboo Labs printers are amazing, but if you are interested in skipping the troubleshooting and errors and frustrations that I see a lot of first-time printers have, I do have a guide to printing clay cutters for just $20, and I also have 50 STLs to give you as well. These are all completely unique. You cannot find them on MakerWorld and you cannot purchase them. They're completely exclusive to my course, Cutter Kickstart. So if you want to learn more about that below, I highly recommend it. It will show you how to get started from ordering your printer all the way to unboxing it, setting up your prints, and getting several successful prints, not just the first successful print. It comes with a membership, so if you have any questions or concerns, there's always someone there to help you out. And I am very proud of this course, and it has helped so many polymer clay makers get started on their 3D printing journey. So check it out below if you're interested, and I'm so excited for you to start your 3D printing journey.